My name is Rena Hall. I'm 33 years old. She still thinks those degrees make her important. Jillian says it loud in that perfectly polished laugh that isn't really a laugh. My cousin. Same blood, different script. I don't say a word. I don't even blink. We're standing just outside the tent at the vineyard reception. Warm lights draped over the wooden beams, fairy tale music drifting from the quartet, glasses clinking. Everyone in linen and pastels except me. I'm in black, not because I planned to be, because it's the only dress I didn't mind ruining. She keeps talking, voice soft but sharp enough to slice. 2 master's degrees and not even a +1. Rena's always been focused. Focused. Like it's a flaw, a diagnosis. Across the gravel path, a man in uniform stiffens. He whispers something into his mic. No one else notices. I lift my glass mostly to keep my hands from doing anything else. And then the wind changes. Just slightly. A black SUV turns onto the gravel. And Jillian goes silent. I don't look at her. I let the silence stretch. If I breathe too deep, the mask might crack. And I need it intact a little longer. The SUV door hasn't opened yet, but its tires crunch too slowly, deliberately. They all turn Aunt Elise with her wine glass mid-air, Uncle Rob adjusting his collar. Even the violinist stops to see who's coming. The moment hovers. Still no one speaks to me, not directly. I sip what's left in my glass. Warm Chardonnay. Tastes like burnt sugar. A cousin Connor, the oldest, leans over to Jillian. Who did she even invite? They whisper like I'm not 3 feet away. Like I'm a guest, not blood. It's fine. The last time I came to a family gathering was, 4 years ago? Right after my 2nd degree. Right before things changed. I glanced down at my shoes. Dusty. Wrong for the setting. But I wore them on purpose. I knew the vineyard would have uneven paths, knew I might need to walk away. The SUV door clicks open. A man steps out sharply dressed, not flashy. The kind of presence that quiets a space without trying. Not family, not local. Definitely not casual. He walks around, opens the rear door himself, and then I see the shoes. Polished leather. Female. A woman steps out slowly, nods once at him, then turns to face the tent. And Jillian, God help her, gasps. Is that the minister? Her voice is smaller now. That beautiful, flippant confidence she wrapped herself in is suddenly slipping. The woman doesn't acknowledge anyone, just scans the space until her eyes land on me. She nods. I set down my glass. Still no one says a word to me. They just watch. She walks toward me each step, careful but certain. Her aide hangs back. Her eyes don't leave mine. Then she speaks. Minister awaits you. A pin could fall. Connor mutters. Who what minister? But I've already started walking. I don't hear the quartet start up again. Maybe they don't. The wind kicks up as I step off the tent platform, gravel biting under my soles. Her car door is still open. I nod my thanks. She doesn't smile. She just steps aside, giving me space to enter. It smells like leather and paper inside. The seat is warm. The driver doesn't turn. He simply nods and begins driving. 10 seconds. Maybe 15. That's how long I'm in the car before I let out a breath. Thank you, I murmur. She nods once, watching the vineyard fade behind us in the rearview mirror. They didn't know. That's their problem, not yours. I didn't expect this. Her glance is quick, measured. You earned it. I look down at my hands. The cuticle on my right thumb is torn. I press against it gently. They always made it sound like I was the one who didn't understand how the world works. She laughs once dry. It's easy to mock what you can't match. We drive in silence for a stretch. Hills roll past. Sun dipping low behind the trees. I think of Jillian's laugh, how she timed it perfectly with every toast, how she wore that blush-colored dress like it had been picked by a stylist, how Aunt Elise kept leaning toward her all evening like gravity itself had favorites. 2 master's degrees, in systems engineering and political linguistics, 12 years of contracts, clearances, corridors with no names, And somehow none of that gave me the right shoes or voice or smile to belong under their fairy lights. I ask quietly, "What changed?" She doesn't answer right away. Instead, she reaches into her side pocket and hands me a folder. My name is on the tab, stamped, cleared. I flip it open. My briefing, my next assignment. Ministerial level. Lead technical advisor. I told them, she says calmly, if they wanted results, they needed to stop overlooking the people doing the real work. A pause. And that started with you. The SUV curves through a forest road. Somewhere far from the vineyard, but I can still hear Jillian's voice. That little laugh. She still thinks those degrees make her important. I smile. Not because it was funny, but because now I know exactly where I'm going. And why. I close the folder. Place it on my lap. My thumb rests on the seal. There's still dust on my shoes. But somehow, it feels earned. When I was 12, Aunt Elise took Jillian and me to a dress shop in Charleston. We were visiting for Easter everyone in town, the kind of holiday where the adults drank white wine from 11 and the cousins were expected to stay quiet, clean, and pretty. Jillian was already good at that. She knew how to smile without smiling, how to mirror our aunt's little gestures. The seamstress pinned my shoulder and muttered, "Too square." Jillian giggled behind the dressing curtain. That was the first time I realized I didn't move the right way for their world. I stood too straight. I asked too many questions. I read the plaque by the register while they debated ruffles. By the time we were teenagers, it had calcified. Jillian went to Vanderbilt. Connor interned with a congressman. I went to Georgia Tech. No one asked why. They just assumed. She's more technical, Aunt Elise said once in that clipped, genteel tone that could cut deeper than yelling ever could. Numbers suit her. When my acceptance letter came for my first MS in systems engineering, no one sent flowers. No one flew out. But Jillian got a graduation party with candles floating in the pool. I showed up late, stayed quiet, watched her glide across the backyard in that white linen dress, smiling for pictures with a champagne flute even though she never finished hers. "She's the face of the family," my uncle whispered proudly that day. I was just a footnote. I think they feared anything that couldn't be explained in 2 sentences over brunch, and I never made it easy. I didn't try to soften what I studied: algorithms, multilingual tactical modeling, machine cognition, for ambiguous terrain interpretation. Those weren't just passions. They were a language that no one in my family bothered to learn. They asked what I did, but never waited for the answer. They'd nod halfway through and say something like, "Oh, smart stuff, got it," and then pivot to Jillian's recent photo shoot or Connor's latest campaign event. I can't blame them entirely. I never played the game. I didn't post online. I didn't invite them to ceremonies. I stopped explaining what I did when I realized they weren't listening anyway. When I earned my second MS, this time in political linguistics, I told them in passing, at Thanksgiving, between the mashed potatoes and the second bottle of wine. Jillian smiled wide. "Wow. So, words and stuff?" I nodded, something like that. Uncle Rob raised his glass. To Rena, our very own language scientist. They all laughed. I laughed too, but only to keep the table warm. They thought I was eccentric, brilliant in a useless way, academic, isolated, a loner with theories and equations and charts no one cared to understand. But they didn't know the hours, didn't know the freezing base housing in Colorado, the endless simulations, the classified nights spent parsing dialect shifts in satellite intercepts that could alter entire regional outcomes. They didn't know the name I'd been given in the shadows, didn't know that entire briefings, silent color-coded briefings, were built on patterns. I had parsed translations. I had adjusted algorithms. I had trained to understand nuance in insurgent intent. They didn't know because I never told them. And because I didn't tell them, they assumed I had nothing worth saying. 3 months before Jillian's vineyard reception, I turned down a visible, high-paying position at a tech giant. It would have looked good on paper, made me understandable. A LinkedIn post they could point to with pride. But it wasn't the work, and I don't do things just to look good anymore. I chose the quiet path again, one that required clearance, resilience, and the understanding that you'll never get public applause for doing the hard thing right. I remember telling my mother about it gently. Her voice over the phone was flat. "You're sure, I mean..." Jillian's company offered her a VP title right after her fellowship. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood no amount of explaining would make them see a world they refused to see. It's not like they were cruel, not in any big storybook way. They didn't yell or throw things or cut me off financially. They just erased me in real time, in the silences, in the choices of who got asked to speak, who was toasted, who got the corner seat at the wedding table. I was always at the end, near the staff entrance, near the plastic pitchers and wilting roses. So I learned to stay quiet, not because I lacked voice, but because I knew they weren't listening. I stopped wearing mascara to their events, stopped trying to explain what my projects meant. I let them believe I lived small alone, buried in books and data, because it made them comfortable, because it cost me less energy, until the world noticed what they refused to see, until someone somewhere recognized that 2 master's degrees, when forged in silence, sweat, and service carry weight no champagne party could rival. I used to wonder if maybe I was wrong, if maybe I was the one too proud, too standoffish, too strange. But every time I was deployed for simulation training with NATO linguistics teams, every time I sat across from generals who asked for my interpretation before issuing orders, I remembered no. I wasn't the one who misunderstood my value. They were. They always had been. It was Jillian who made the call about Grandma's estate, not my mother, not Aunt Elise. Jillian. She said it like it was a formality. We're just finalizing the details. Didn't think you'd want to be involved, Rena. You've got other things. Other things. I sat at my kitchen table mug, cooling in my hands, listening to her voice through the speakerphone. Confident, clean, detached. The tone people use with hotel staff they don't plan to tip. I asked quietly, "You're splitting the house." She hesitated. "Well, technically it's already been split. You weren't listed. Grandma updated the will last year. Just us 5. I closed my eyes. "She didn't tell me I said." "Oh," Jillian replied, and I could hear her smile. I thought she had. She hadn't. Grandma and I had spoken twice a month every month without fail. She always asked about my work, even when she didn't understand. She once told me, "You're the only one who reminds me of my father. He solved problems without raising his voice. That house had the shelf I built her, the sunroom I painted, my name in cursive on the back of an old photo taped to her mirror. But none of it mattered. They'd divided it without me. Sold off her jewelry, boxed her books, erased the smell of her perfume from the hallway before I could even step inside. I didn't fight it, not officially, but something cracked that day. Not rage, not even grief. Just a dull awareness they'd made their choice. And they'd done it when I wasn't looking because that's how they worked. Quiet removals, polite exclusions. No confrontation, just the soft hum of doors closing. I thought that was the worst of it. Until I saw the photo. Jillian posted it on the family group thread 2 weeks later. Everyone smiled at the vineyard holding a frame in memory of Grandma Hall, 1929, 2023. Connor captioned it. She would have been proud to see us carry on the family. Everyone liked it. No one noticed or pretended not to notice that I wasn't in the photo, wasn't even invited. I stared at the screen, not because it hurt, but because of how normal they made it feel. As if I never existed. That was the pattern. They didn't push me out. They just stopped reaching out, stopped including me in things that mattered. Birthdays, graduations, even funerals. They let the idea of me fade too serious, too private, too other. My degrees became jokes. My work became mystery. My absence became convenience. Once at a family brunch, Jillian leaned over and whispered, "Honestly, it's hard to keep track of what you do, Rena. No one even knows where you live." It wasn't meant to be cruel. That's what made it worse. It was said with a smile, with love, like a joke you're expected to laugh at. I remember staring at the slice of lemon in my glass, wondering if I had imagined the shift in her tone, the subtle, slippery way she reduced my entire life to vagueness. And the truth is, I let her. I let all of them. Because fighting to be seen is exhausting. And somewhere along the line, I decided silence was easier than justifying every choice I made. So they took it all. Not my money, not my degrees, but something harder to reclaim. My place. The hardest moment. It wasn't the house. It wasn't being left out of Grandma's memorial. It was watching my mother choose their version of me over the truth. After the estate was finalized, I flew home to the base town I rarely told anyone about. She called me the next day. "I know this must feel unfair," she said, "but maybe if you'd just shared more, been around more." I didn't answer. Because how do you explain to someone that you kept your silence to protect what little connection you had left? I tried once. Years ago, I told her carefully that some of what I worked on couldn't be discussed. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on, Rena. You make it sound like you're in the CIA or something." I never tried again. So, yes, they took everything from me that could have kept me tethered. Family photos, Thanksgiving chairs, the right to be included in the moments that matter. They reduced me to the cousin with degrees and no husband, the woman with files but no footprint. But here's the thing about erasure. It only works when the erased stay gone. After the estate, I stopped calling. Not out of anger, but clarity. I finally saw the lines they'd drawn, and I stepped back from them fully. It felt like drowning at first, losing the hope that one day they'd notice, apologize, ask me what I was building all these years. But eventually, the stillness made space for something else. Focus. Not the kind they mocked at brunches, the real kind. The kind that rewired protocols. The kind that got classified intel through diplomatic doors. The kind that kept soldiers alive by anticipating dialect variations in intercepted chatter. The kind they'd never understand. Until that vineyard. Until that SUV. Until the woman said, "Minister awaits you." And silence did what years of speaking never could. The worst part wasn't the estate. It wasn't the photo. It was the quiet after, the space that came next. No texts, no check-ins, no calls. I'd spent years moving between bases conferences, dark glass offices where people whispered my name like it was both a question and a password. I was used to silence. I thought I was strong in it. But that kind of silence, the family kind, the "we've decided you're not one of us" kind, settles deeper. It doesn't shout. It erodes. I remember the day it almost broke me. Rain tapped the windows. Soft, insistent. I was sitting in my apartment in Arlington, the temporary one near the secure facility. I'd just submitted a report 42 pages on linguistic distortion trends in encrypted non-state networks. It had taken 6 weeks of sleepless nights, half a dozen briefings, and a security protocol that meant I couldn't even keep a backup for myself. No applause, no visible credit. Just a silent message. Received, integrated, well done. Then nothing. I closed my laptop and stared at the blank wall for a long time. On the coffee table was the invitation to the Vineyard event. Cream cardstock, gold-trimmed Jillian's name embossed like royalty. The RSVP line had been left blank. I hadn't checked yes or no, because I didn't know what I was anymore. A relative, an outsider. A ghost with degrees. I stood up, walked to the mirror above the sink. No makeup, hair tied back, black t-shirt, faded jeans. Nothing about me looked remarkable. Not to the outside world. Not to the version of family that dressed in curated charm and weaponized politeness. I touched the edge of the invitation. Then I whispered the question I had never let myself ask out loud. What if they're right? What if my work didn't matter? What if all the clearances and contracts and classified meetings were just technicalities? What if I'd built a life that no one would remember when I was gone? That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch under a thin blanket phone screen, lighting my face, scrolling back through old family photos. There I was, age 10, holding a science fair trophy, standing beside Jillian in her ballet slippers. Even then, I was the one in the oversized sweatshirt holding something no one could pronounce. She was the one in a perfect pose, smiling like she already knew how to be admired. The next photo, high school Thanksgiving. Jillian and Connor at the head of the table. I was cropped halfway out. A part of me wanted to delete them all. Another part couldn't stop staring, not out of nostalgia, but disbelief, that I had believed them for so long, that I had let their version of me overwrite my own, that somehow, despite all I'd done, I still needed them to tell me I mattered. The next morning, I didn't check my emails, didn't read the news, didn't open a single file. I just sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. Around noon, my mother texted, "Will you be at the reception? Jillian would love to see you. No pressure." I stared at the screen for a long time. The casualness of it. The way they always framed my absence as a choice I made to isolate myself instead of a wall they quietly built and painted over. I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I opened the old aluminum box I kept under my desk, the one with my original degree, certificates, my commendation letters, and a note from a retired Air Force general I'd once briefed in Brussels. I hadn't opened it in 2 years. Inside, folded at the top, was a single sheet of lined paper, my grandmother's handwriting, a note she'd mailed me after my second graduation. "You are the kind of woman men fear and countries depend on. I don't always understand what you do, but I trust why you do it. Keep going, Rena. You are becoming something extraordinary." "Grandma," I cried. Not loudly, not all at once, but the kind of cry that starts in the throat and burns behind the eyes. Because for a moment I'd forgotten that letter existed. I'd forgotten she had seen me, even when no one else did. And I hated how close I'd come to letting their laughter, their silence, erase that. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen counter and made a decision. Not to fight them, not to explain myself, but to show up. Not because I needed their approval, but because I wanted one clear moment, one sliver of truth where I stood fully in who I was. Not the cousin with no +1, not the woman with mysterious degrees, but Rena Hall, who had been underestimated her entire life, and who was no longer waiting to be invited in. The night before the reception, I laid out my black dress, the one with sleeves and sharp lines. Not elegant, not soft, not pastel. It wasn't meant to flatter. It was meant to hold, to remind me that I'd made it through worse, that I was still here, that I had never really been invisible, just unacknowledged. Until now. I arrived 20 minutes early, not because I needed to, because I wanted to feel the ground before they took up the air. The vineyard was quiet at that hour, the tent still half-assembled floral centerpieces being fanned out on long wooden tables. A young man in a vest nodded at me as I stepped past the gravel path and onto the brick. His eyes flicked to my shoes, plain black leather scuffed at the edges. Then to my face. I gave a small nod. I wasn't here to impress. I wasn't here to explain. I was here to be undeniable. The truth is, I never needed their version of power. I had mine. Earned in nights no one saw, in files that passed across tables labeled "confidential eyes only." Earned in languages I spoke for seconds before wiping them from memory. Earned in the rooms where decisions were made, and I was the one who briefed the people who briefed the world. But I wore it quietly. No titles on my blazer, no business cards, just a name that circulated where it mattered. Rena Hall. They thought power looked like a corner office, a trust fund, a perfect photo. Mine looked like untraceable systems and negotiated ceasefires and code that broke before missiles did. I didn't bring a +1. I brought presence. I walked along the edge of the vineyard before the guests arrived, slow and deliberate, letting my mind settle. The dress I wore wasn't elegant, but it fit. Black, long, precise. No flowing sleeves or shimmering silk. If they asked, I could say I'd just come from work. Technically, I had. My last assignment had been on site at a UN liaison meeting where half the table hadn't realized the translator they requested was also the architect of the briefing model they were discussing. I stayed quiet through most of it, listening, tracking, noting who spoke too quickly, who smirked when they thought someone missed a term, and when one delegate slipped and misused a term that shifted the entire geopolitical tone of the meeting, I corrected him. In his native language. The room went still. He blinked, nodded, then rephrased. No one asked who I was after that. They just listened differently. I learned to move that way between assumptions, not to shame anyone, but to stay effective. I don't wear badges. I don't demand applause. I don't need to. Real power doesn't announce itself. It arrives already known by the right people. An hour into the reception, the tent was full. Laughter whined strings in the background. I stood to the side, sipping quietly, offering smiles when they were due, avoiding small talk that made me shrink. Jillian arrived fashionably late in blush chiffon, the same smile she wore at every family event. My mother kissed her cheek. Connor held up a glass. And then they noticed me. Just for a moment. Just long enough for their expressions to register confusion. Then recalibration. Then dismissal. I was still alone after all, still wearing something plain. Still the cousin with the degrees and no story they could tell. Jillian approached first. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice bright but guarded. "I said I would," I answered. She glanced at my dress. "It's a bit formal. It fits the occasion." She laughed, not kindly. "Well, at least you're not in boots and a laptop bag this time." I smiled. "Not today." She didn't know what to say after that. So she drifted. They always did. But I noticed something this time. They looked at me more often. Not directly, not openly, but sideways glances, half-measured steps around the space I stood in, like the perimeter had shifted and they couldn't explain why. It wasn't the dress. It wasn't even my presence. It was the stillness, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are without asking anyone else to confirm it. A week before the event, I had received a private message, encrypted, clearance level 4. Subject Strategic Civilian Recognition Coordination, Discrete Access, the Sender Office of the Minister for Defense Technology and International Analysis. It wasn't flashy, but it was rare. The woman who would later step out of the SUV had written it herself. She had attended one of my briefings a year prior. Quietly, sat in the back, asked no questions. But afterward, her assistant sent a note. "She would like to know if you'd ever consider stepping forward, not up forward." I didn't respond for months. Then when I did, I said only this: "Not for ceremony. Only if the next step matters." Her reply: "Then let's make it matter." That vineyard reception was chosen intentionally. Not by me, by them. Her team had studied the date, location, family connections. They knew the timing of my exclusion. They knew what it had cost, and they decided without permission or performance to meet me there. Not in a boardroom, not in D.C., but on the soil where I was once made to feel invisible. So when the SUV arrived, when she stepped out, when her aide opened the door and spoke, "Minister awaits you," everything shifted, not because I proved them wrong, but because I'd never needed to prove anything in the first place. They just finally noticed what had always been there. And this time I didn't shrink. I was still holding the last glass of water for Aunt Cheryl when I heard the low rumble outside. It wasn't dramatic. No screeching tires, no flashing lights. Just the smooth hush of high-grade tires on gravel and a final idle hum of a vehicle engine settling into stillness. Yet somehow, it pierced through the entire living room louder than any insult my cousins had thrown. Mom looked up first. Her hands paused mid-fold as she was stacking dessert napkins on the counter. Uncle Terry, the loudest of the group, stopped laughing in the middle of telling a story that probably had a punchline about me. His eyes flicked toward the window like a man half remembering something he didn't want to remember. I didn't move. But my heart did, because I knew that sound. The sleek engine hum of a plated foreign diplomatic SUV. I had ridden in one just like it 2 weeks ago in Warsaw. The same model, same whisper-smooth sound when the door clicked shut. No one spoke as the front doorbell rang, not once. Just a single ring, short, assertive. Aunt Cheryl moved toward the door but stopped halfway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like armor. "Did anyone order something?" she asked flatly. Dad cleared his throat, probably just the neighbors. Ignore it. But it rang again. One more time. Just once. This time with intention. I placed the glass down. I didn't need to look through the window. I already knew. I opened the front door, and there he was. Tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a black-gray suit, formal but unbranded, no tie, no lapel pin, but his shoes were regulation polished and his shoulders held years of military bearing no ordinary businessman ever learned. He didn't smile, didn't step forward. He only inclined his head. Then his voice measured with a quiet authority that didn't ask questions. "Dr. Holden, the minister awaits you." The living room behind me became dead quiet. Aunt Cheryl blinked. "I'm sorry." The what? But the man didn't answer her. His eyes were on me alone. I stepped outside and nodded. Understood. Still, I didn't rush. I turned and looked back into the living room. My family, so loud, so certain now, sat still like a scene caught in freeze frame. Mom had her hand on the napkin pile, frozen mid-reach. Uncle Terry's jaw slackened slightly. The story he'd been telling was half-remembered now. Angela clutched her phone but wasn't filming. Not anymore. And Beth, my cousin who once laughed when I got my second MS, looked pale, like her blood had drained out through her heels, because they knew. They didn't know who the minister was or why I was being summoned, but they knew the weight behind that word. In their world, ministers didn't just wait for people like me, but in mine, they did. The man stepped aside and held the car door open for me, not like a chauffeur, like a colleague. I climbed in, the door closed softly behind me. Silence. Inside the SUV was spotless climate-controlled and filled with the faint scent of leather and something sterile probably from the air filtration system, the kind they used when transporting government officials in active zones. The driver didn't speak. The man in the passenger seat didn't look back. We pulled away from the curb with no rush, no urgency. But inside, something was shifting. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Not nerves, not fear. Something deeper, closure. I wasn't being saved. I wasn't being rescued. I was being recognized. For years, I had never expected them to understand what I did. They weren't supposed to. 2 master's degrees in tactical systems and computational linguistics with a subfield in non-NATO communication chains wasn't exactly Sunday dinner conversation, and that was fine. But what I couldn't forget was the mocking, the way Beth once asked me if my little second degree came with coloring books, or how Uncle Terry called me Ms. Too Smart for real work in front of 10 people at last year's BBQ. How even my own mother said, "I just wish you did something normal, something people could understand." But now she couldn't even speak. Because the moment that suited man said, "The minister awaits you," all their illusions cracked. Not because of a title, not because of status, but because someone they couldn't dismiss, someone they didn't know, recognized my value without question. And that scared them more than any resume ever could. We drove 20 silent minutes. Then, the SUV slowed beside a neutral-colored building tucked behind a secured gate. Not a military compound, not an embassy, something in between. The man turned to me now, his voice low. "He won't be long. Just wanted a word before the second stage briefings." I nodded. Second stage. That meant this was bigger than Poland, bigger than the last deployment or the encrypted ops work I'd done from Frankfurt. I stepped out of the SUV into the late afternoon sun. No crowds, no press. Just one person waiting outside. An older man, distinguished, dressed simply, but with a ring on his finger engraved with a national crest. He smiled as I approached, but it wasn't warm or soft. It was the kind of smile you give a trusted asset. Someone who didn't need a welcome, just confirmation. "Dr. Holden," he said, "we'll be needing you in Brussels by Friday." I nodded once. "I'll be ready." His gaze flicked toward the SUV behind me, then down the road. "They saw, didn't they?" I didn't answer. He gave a quiet hum, satisfied. "Good. Then we're finally done with the first act." He turned and walked inside. I followed, and behind me, the gate closed, silently, decisively, letting everything else stay behind where it belonged. I don't remember the first breath I took after the SUV door closed behind me. It might have been a full minute later, my fingers still curled around the leather handle, the scent of military-grade polish and faint eucalyptus still clinging to my clothes. The minister's words still echoed somewhere behind my ribs, "You walk with us now." He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't looked at them. He simply stepped aside for me, and I, despite everything in my childhood, despite every family dinner I sat through in silence, walked forward, into the vehicle, into purpose, into something that had never required their permission. The SUV glided down the driveway, and through the tinted glass I caught the last image of them, my cousins standing frozen on the porch, Aunt Cora clutching her pearls, Landon with his mouth slightly open, Kelsey stiff as glass knuckles white against the railing, the mockers now stunned into reverent silence. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not pride. Not even the sweet high of vindication that books love to describe. Just stillness. The kind that comes when a long, loud storm finally dies and you realize it was never about noise. It was always about direction. I leaned back. Outside, the city blurred past red brick rusted fences. Community centers I once volunteered in, places where degrees didn't matter, only impact did. The man seated across from me, the liaison. Andre studied my file silently for a while. Then he closed it and said softly, "You didn't hesitate back there." I met his gaze. "I've been walking away my whole life. This time I just had somewhere worth walking to." He nodded, a slight respect flickering in his posture. "The minister said you never advertised your background. Your papers weren't submitted by you. Someone referred you." I exhaled. I already knew who. Professor Wendell. He must have quietly submitted my research portfolio from the Defense Symposium. I had spoken on predictive modeling for humanitarian evacuations work no one at the family table had asked about, but he had, and apparently so had someone much higher. "I didn't know," I said quietly. "Not until last week." Andre gave a small smile. "People who don't self-promote are often the ones we need most." The SUV slowed. We turned down a narrow path guarded by what looked like two ordinary cyclists at first glance, until you caught the earpieces, the military posture, the drone gliding high overhead. This wasn't just a visit. This was vetting, and I wasn't just here for optics. They needed someone with my dual skill set, systems analysis and applied military logistics. The degrees mocked by my family were exactly what positioned me for this new classified division, cross-border data coordination for disaster response. Civilian brains with military-grade clarity. The gates opened. We entered what looked like a converted embassy compound. White facade. No flags. Clean lines, sharp security. And the moment I stepped out of the SUV, someone handed me a black lanyard with a platinum chip. No words, no ceremony. But it felt like the kind of nod I'd been waiting my entire life for, not loud, not showy. Just earned. That night I stayed at the secured facility. I lay awake staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. There was no noise, no laughter down the hall, no mocking voices trying to make themselves feel taller by cutting others down. Just peace, and an eerie absence of judgment. It was a peace I didn't trust yet, because I had spent most of my life mistaking tolerance for love. My cousins had tolerated me, let me tag along, pretended their teasing was playful. And the family bought it because it was easier to laugh than confront the truth that I had changed. And they hadn't. That I had grown out of their shadow, and they resented it. But now they had seen something undeniable. They had watched the SUV stop not for them, but for me. Watched a minister of defense speak to me with reverence, not as a guest, not as a favor, but as an equal. That's not something you can unsee. I didn't attend the family barbecue the next weekend. Aunt Cora still hosted it. I heard from an old neighbor who saw the cars, the music, the usual laughter. But there was a strange detail, a seat left empty at the corner table. Mine. I didn't ask them to do that. Didn't care, really. But part of me knows why they did. Not guilt, not regret, but presence. Because for the first time, I wasn't beneath their notice. I wasn't just the quiet cousin with mysterious degrees. I was the one the minister had come for. And suddenly, every past silence I'd endured, every moment of invisibility, became weighty. They finally realized the cost of what they'd dismissed. Weeks passed. I received my full clearance badge. Worked directly under a program that streamlined humanitarian resource deployment. No social media, no press, just precision. Results. One evening, I stood outside the compound during sunset, and my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered, and a voice I hadn't heard in years whispered, "Hey." "It's Landon." I didn't speak. He hesitated. "Then I don't expect you to respond." Just wanted to say I saw everything. And I get it now. I didn't before. But I do. The wind rustled. He continued softer now. "If you ever want to come back, even just for Mom, just know the porch light's on." I ended the call quietly, didn't block him, didn't save the number either, because that was never my home. This was. A week later, we had a private meeting with 3 foreign delegates. The room smelled of leather binders and fresh intel. My nameplate read Advisor Cross-Conflict Logistics, the youngest at the table. And when I spoke, they listened. Not because of charm, not because of family name, but because I knew what they didn't. That real strategy isn't loud. It doesn't wear glitter or demand applause. It walks in quietly and changes the direction of the room. That was the legacy I chose. And they finally saw it too, even if too late.